The GI concept is a measurement of how much the carbohydrate in foods will raise your blood glucose or your blood sugar. And when we talk about carbohydrate, we mean we're not including fiber. We're only talking about the digestible or the available carbohydrate. And we've found that different foods have remarkably different glucose responses for the same amount of carbohydrate. So if you have like a diabetes exchange list and you have 15 grams of carbohydrate from one food, it may give a very different response than 15 grams of carbohydrate from another. So we developed the glycemic index as a way of measuring that, and we measure it in people. And why is it important? It's important because over the years, research has shown that it has relevance to many, to health and in disease. So for example, for health, there's evidence, not particularly good, but emerging evidence that glycemic index can impact, the glycemic index of the carbohydrates you eat can impact your physical performance. You know, your endurance for exercise. There's evidence that it can impact your mood and your memory. So for example, usually in the late morning, your memory performance tends to go down just before lunch, whereas if you have a low GI breakfast, that memory can be retained better. It doesn't go down as far. Another area where glycemic index has been shown to be relevant is the area of weight management. I mean, many people are concerned about their weight. The prevalence of obesity is rising all around the world. And it's been shown that after people lose weight, if they stick with a low GI diet, it helps them to maintain their weight loss better, and it can actually help them lose weight better as well. In terms, there's some other very interesting information. There's some studies showing that it can reduce the severity of acne. So it actually has relevance for your social life. It impacts on the outcome of pregnancy. Some of the best evidence we have is that it's good for improving blood sugar control in diabetes. There's evidence that it can help reduce the risk for getting diabetes, for heart disease, and a lot of other health conditions. So it's really a very good thing for our health to eat low GI foods. No, a number of critics of the GI have sort of said that's what we're saying, and that's not at all what we're saying. Many high GI foods, breads and things are very convenient. They're part of people's traditional diets, and they can be very healthy foods. They have a lot of nutrients. So you don't have to exclude all high GI foods. Clearly, we'd recommend you replace some of your high GI foods with low GI. So the recommendation is to try and have at least one serving of a low GI carbohydrate with every meal. And if you mix low with high carbohydrate, high GI foods, then you end up with a medium GI. So, the low helps to reduce the impact of the high. First, where can you do it? Well, you can do it right here in Temasek Polytech. They have the only accredited GI testing lab in the world, accredited by the Singapore government. And we've been working with Kalpana and the other people in the lab, and I know they do excellent work, absolutely outstanding work. So that's where you can get it tested. There are other labs in other parts of the world. We have a lab in Toronto which does GI testing as well. How accurate is it? This has been a criticism. Of course, people's responses vary from day to day, and if you ate a low GI food and tested it today, and then you ate it again and test it tomorrow, you may get different responses because people's glucose responses vary a lot. But so we take the average of at least 10 people when we do the measurement, and that measurement is precise enough to be able to distinguish a high GI food from a low GI food with a high degree of certainty. So a high GI food is one with a GI of 70 or more, and a low GI is 55 or less. So if you see a food which has got a low GI and it's been measured properly, then you can be quite certain that it's certainly not high GI. There's, of course, an error around that, and if you repeat the test, you might get a little bit of a different number. But it's certainly precise enough for food labeling purposes. At least I know in our Canadian regulations, it's precise enough to meet those regulations. Cooking, it depends, and this is a very complex area, and that's why the critics, they get concerned. Cooking some foods can increase it. For example, if you overcook spaghetti, pasta, it can become higher GI. But other foods don't. For example, red lentils, you can cook them, boil them for 20 minutes or boil them for an hour, and it really doesn't make much difference. Potatoes are another food which are probably sensitive to cooking. One of the interesting things is if you take cooked foods and then allow them to cool down, their GI actually goes down. So a potato, for example, a hot potato may have a high GI when it's hot, but when it's cooled, it goes back, potato salad, it goes right back down again. We now actually have low GI varieties of potato anyway when they're cooked. So when you see a food with the low GI, that would be based on cooking according to the package directions. I think most starches would be like that. Rice may very well be like that. I'm sure cornstarch is like that. Some legumes, some of them, if they're canned, they have a much higher GI than if you cook them yourself. Others don't. I mean, it's a little bit, and we don't fully understand all of these factors from the chemistry. The starch does have a chemical structure, and it's changed by cooking. And different varieties of the same kinds of foods can have different GI values. So it can be confusing, but this is why it's very important that we test the food supply, and that's what TP has been doing over the last few years, testing the Singaporean food supply, and these data will become available in due course to everyone so that they'll be able to know. Well, I can give you, it's not fully understood, but for example, for performance, one of the fuels you use for performance, and I'm talking about high-level athletes, is carbohydrate, blood sugar. And when the blood sugar level drops, then people's performance goes down because it's an indication that the carbohydrate stores in the muscle and in the blood are becoming exhausted. And what much of the research shows is that if you have a low GI meal before you exercise, the blood sugar is maintained for longer. It doesn't go up so high, but it doesn't drop as low. So during the exercise, it doesn't go down as low, and you seem to have more glucose available for your fuel. Another thing that one of the studies showed, which I think is fascinating, is that they had people cycling at a fixed work rate, and the people after the low GI, it felt the perceived exertion was less. So it may be affecting our mood or our perception of how hard the work is. In terms of weight loss, what we think is happening is the carbohydrate in low GI foods tends to be a little more slowly digested, or that's how it works, and a little bit more of this carbohydrate may kind of leak out the end of the intestine into the colon and support the bacteria in the colon. And the bacteria in the colon are now being linked to many aspects of health and even overweight. So overweight people have different kinds of bacteria, and when they lose weight, the bacteria change to become more like lean. So it's quite possible. First off, we're losing a little energy that way, and second, we may feel fuller because of the signals the bacteria are sending, and we may not eat as much. Yeah, so I would think I would recommend people to have choose whole grains and higher fiber foods where possible. What the research shows is that the impact of the whole grains and the fiber really depends upon their glycemic index. So if you read the scientific literature about whole grains, people will say, well, the way they work is because they have a lower glucose response. Well, that's just not true for many things. So, for example, 100% whole wheat bread has the same glycemic index as white bread. The bread becomes lower GI if it's stone ground or ground to a less fine particle size. If the kernels of wheat or whatever, rye, are actually intact, so they're harder to digest. And and sourdough bread, some of the organic acids can help lower the GI as well. So it's not necessarily true that whole grain, so like brown rice is the same glycemic index as white rice, brown spaghetti, same as white spaghetti. I'm not saying these foods are bad. It's better to choose whole grain, but they're not necessarily low GI. And the best results come from low GI and whole grain. And not all fibers will lower cholesterol, and the ones which are low GI will lower cholesterol, and so on. I think it's a good question, and part of the reason, I think, is that there's a good deal of opposition to this concept in North America and in Europe, where the concept originated and where a lot of the earlier research was done, and very influential people were not in favor of it, and they gave a lot of reasons why, and all of these reasons are not, they're not correct. It shows they don't really understand what they're talking about. They're usually talking about a glycemic response. A glycemic index is not a response. It's a property of the food. A glycemic response is a property of a person, you know. But so it's taken a little while for people to come around, and I think as the research results have accumulated, we now have, for example, the Harvard group, Walt Willett, they've done lots of research, and all of their research shows that low GI reduces risk for stroke and diabetes and heart disease and lots of things, and they're very much in favor of it. We have influential people in Boston, David Ludwig, who's shown that it can help adolescent kids lose weight, right, and be healthier. So it's coming around. The other problem is it's expensive. People think it's expensive to measure, and they're concerned about how all these variables we talked about can influence the result. And it's not that easy to develop a low GI bread. You know, it's quite hard. And I know people here at TP have been working very hard. You have a very good setup with your culinary school and your chemistry and then the GI lab here to develop low GI things. And there hasn't been that kind of cooperation, collaboration between various disciplines to do that. I find it a little odd as to why not, but I'm very glad to see that, you know, the Singapore government's very innovative in taking this project on and wanting to see it part of public health recommendations. There are various ones. I mean, I understand there's a group at Singapore University who tests. I've worked with some people in Malaysia who've done some testing. They actually do quite good testing. Malaysia, the TP lab is special because it has been rigorously accredited, and there is an international method which we developed to measure the GI. It takes training. It's not the sort of thing that people normally do, and many labs don't follow that method, and their results are not as accurate or precise if they don't follow the method. And so the TP lab has been accredited to follow that method very carefully. We follow the method carefully in Toronto, but there's no place that will accredit us for doing it, right? So that's part of the problem. But that's what makes labs special, whether they do it properly. I would say if you want to do that, I would encourage people to do it properly. They need to get it, they want to talk to people. There's some examples of these things which have been done before. I would like to encourage people to use healthy ingredients. You know, I don't want to see people adding a lot of fat or fructose to foods to make them low GI. We want to try and work with other ingredients or other ways of processing which can reduce the GI. So you'll probably want some advice from nutrition people. you'll want to find yourself a lab which does the measurements properly. There are methods you can use which are a little bit less expensive, which rely on doing it in test tubes, doing it in the chemistry lab. I know TP offers that service. That can help to see whether the things you're doing are moving in the right direction with it. They digest the carbohydrate. Ultimately, it needs to be tested in people to demonstrate, to prove that it is low GI. So it may be a fairly long process, but it may be quite rewarding in the long run, because we as a planet, you know, we need to eat a lot of carbohydrate. There's a lot of popular diets out there talking about low carbohydrate. I know in Asia people eat lots of carbohydrate. It's not, we can't grow enough other foods which are not carbohydrates. So we need to eat carbohydrates, and we need to eat the right kind to be healthy. And the burden of chronic disease, of diabetes, obesity, and many other things is growing. Our population is aging. It's really very urgent that we try and do something about this. Well, there's several things. One of the things which makes it special is that it's the only accredited lab in the world. It does the method properly. The other thing that makes it special is the milieu, the environment in which it works here at TP, because you have a tremendous multidisciplinary environment here. You've got culinary arts, you've got food science, you've got chemistry. So you can develop things, you can test them, you can measure what's going on, and then you can pass them on for testing, and then you can take them into a sensory lab to evaluate whether people like them or not. And then you can move on to business to try and figure out how to market these, to educate people about it. So you have the whole system here, and this is what I like about TP, is that it's such a forward-looking place, and it wants to turn what we know, turn that knowledge into real products, which are really going to help people. That's what makes your lab here so special.
At the Glycemic Index Research Unit at Temasek Poly, we conduct a wide range of services, starting from like product development to testing, as well as we also advise them like exactly how they do labeling on packaging. So we offer the entire range of services. For example, if a small medium enterprise comes to us, we tell them what is the right type of ingredients to go into the product for product development. We can offer them the entire range of product development services, right from the product concept until sensory evaluation, as well as to shelf life studies. And then during the product development process, we offer in vitro glycemic index testing, which might deem the process to be like a low glycemic index product. Once the in vitro results prove it to be low glycemic index, then we go on to in vivo GI testing. Because only with in vivo glycemic index testing, which is being done in an accredited laboratory like our lab, then it can go on the product label. That's a requirement by AVA as well as Health Promotion Board of Singapore. Like recently, like we had many successes. One success story is a particular company called High LNLP. They came to us in order to develop a glycemic index bar, a low GI cereal bar. So when they came to us, this is a small SME, it's a startup company. So we try to advise them on the different type of ingredients to use. And the challenge was this product also has to meet the healthier choice requirements, which is put up by Health Promotion Board. So healthier choice, as well as it should be low GI, it should also satisfy the whole grain requirements to get the new low glycemic index whole grain logo, which is offered by Health Promotion Board. We have done the first low GI white bread, which was we did in as early as 2006. Followed by we have done multigrain breads, multigrain muffins, and in muffins we have developed a few varieties like walnut, blueberry, and these muffins were also tested in healthy people as well as in diabetics. And we have done pita breads, and one which is very like Singaporeans like it very much is the Hokkien noodle. We have done the rice noodles. And I think a wide range of products. So what we thought was, whatever the research happening in the lab, we wanted to translate that to the consumers. So we use TP as a test bed, and we have our Bistro Walk, which is our training cafe, which is run by our Bacon Culinary Science students. So we came up with this like almost 5 or 6 low GI meals, which used whole grains. We also used pasta and barley and oats and all that. We came up with different, like almost 5 set meals, and these meals were also tested by our glycemic index research unit, and we tried to introduce this at our cafe. Actually, initially we didn't introduce it as a low GI meal, we just introduced it as a healthy meal, and once customers keep coming back to eat them because it was tasty, then we introduced the low GI concept, and we can proudly say that TP is the first institution, or the first institution with a cafe to launch low GI set meals. Okay, they can just call our ASC hotline, and they can get talk to any of our team members, and we'll put you to the right team, whether it's product development or it's just directly testing. And also Spring Singapore has this innovation capability voucher, so they try to help the SMEs to get some funding for not only for GI testing but healthy product development as well as for testing services.